Time moved through the world the way water moves through still fabric, seeping into every space without announcement or ceremony. It passed through the hours with a patient, unhurried rhythm that required no attention and offered no variation. The days followed the nights, and the nights followed the days, and between them the moments accumulated in their ordinary way, each one adding itself to the vast, formless collection of all the moments that had come before. The world continued its slow turning, the air continued its gentle movement, and the light continued its gradual shift from brightness to shadow and back again. There was no drama in this progression, no sense of urgency or importance. Time simply was, and it moved as it had always moved, carrying everything with it in its soft, invisible current. The clocks in the world marked this passage with their steady ticking, their hands moving in small increments around their faces, dividing the flow into hours and minutes and seconds that could be counted and measured. But the counting was only a convenience, a way for minds to organize what was otherwise formless. Time itself did not count. It simply continued. In the quiet places of the world, where the noise of the day had faded and the stillness of the night had not yet fully settled, there existed a condition that was neither day nor night, but something in between. The light was dim and soft, filtered through windows or lamps that burned with a low, steady flame. The air was cool and still, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and old wood and the accumulated warmth of enclosed spaces. The silence here was not complete. There were small sounds, distant and muted, that drifted through the stillness without breaking it. A creak of a floorboard settling, the soft rustle of fabric as someone shifted in their chair, the barely audible sound of breath moving in and out, slow and rhythmic. These sounds were not intrusions. They were part of the texture of the quiet, small threads woven into the larger fabric of the stillness. The world in these places was at rest, not sleeping, but simply paused, held in a state of gentle suspension that required nothing and expected nothing. Time moved through these spaces just as it moved through all spaces, but here it seemed to move more softly, its passage less insistent. The minute arrived without announcement. There was no signal, no change in the light or the air, no sound or sensation that marked its beginning. It simply became present, settling into the flow of time the way a stone settles into still water, displacing nothing, disturbing nothing, simply taking its place among the other minutes that had come before and the other minutes that would come after. But this minute was different, though the difference was so subtle it would go unnoticed by anyone who was not paying very close attention. The minute stretched. It did not stop or freeze or reverse. It continued to move forward. Time continued to pass, but the passing was slower, gentler, as if the minute had been given more space in which to unfold. The hands of clocks continued their movement, but the movement softened, the ticking grew quieter, the progression became less insistent. The minute expanded, filling itself with more stillness, more silence, more of the quiet emptiness that exists between one moment and the next. And in this expansion, everything that happened within the minute seemed to happen more slowly, more gently, as if the world itself had exhaled and was now resting in the pause between breaths. The light in the room did not change. The lamp continued to burn with its steady, low flame, casting the same soft glow across the walls and the floor. The shadows remained where they had been, draped across the corners and pooled beneath the furniture, their edges soft and indistinct. But the quality of the light seemed to deepen, as if it had been given more time to settle into the space, more room to spread itself through the air. The glow from the lamp was warm and golden, a color that suggested comfort and safety, and it filled the room with a gentle presence that asked for nothing. The light did not flicker or waver. It simply continued its quiet burning, holding the darkness at bay without effort or struggle. The minute stretched around this light, wrapping itself gently around the steady flame, and the light responded by burning just a fraction more softly, its glow becoming even more diffused, even more restful. The room was held in this light, suspended in its warm embrace, and the minute continued its slow, gentle expansion. Breath moved in and out, slow and regular. Chests rose and fell with the same patient rhythm they had held before the minute began. But now, each breath seemed to take slightly longer, the inhale extending just a little further, the exhale releasing just a little more slowly. The air moved through lungs and throats and noses, carrying with it the coolness of the room and the faint scent of dust and old wood. Each breath was complete in itself, a small cycle of intake and release that required no thought or attention. The breathing continued, uninterrupted, unaware of the minute's gentle stretching. The bodies that breathed did not notice the change. They simply continued their automatic work, drawing air in and releasing it, over and over, in the slow, steady rhythm that sustained life without requiring consciousness. The minute held these breaths, giving them more space, more time, allowing each one to unfold with a kind of unhurried grace. The silence between the breaths deepened, becoming richer, more textured, and the breaths themselves seemed to merge with this silence, becoming part of the larger stillness that filled the room. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped from a tap that had not been fully closed. The sound was faint and rhythmic, a soft percussion that marked time in its own way, independent of clocks or minutes. Each drop fell with the same small sound, a gentle tap as it hit the surface of the basin below. The drops continued during the minute, but the rhythm slowed, the space between each fall lengthening, the sound becoming even softer. The water did not stop falling, it simply fell more gently,
each drop taking a little longer to form, a little longer to release itself from the metal mouth of the tap. The minute stretched around these drops, giving them more room, more time, allowing each one to complete its small journey with a kind of patient inevitability. The sound of the water was absorbed into the larger silence of the room, becoming part of the texture of the quiet, rather than a break in it. The dripping continued, slow and steady, marking time that was no longer quite the same time as the time marked by clocks.
The fabric of clothing shifted against skin with movements so small they were barely perceptible. A sleeve brushed against an arm as someone adjusted their position in their chair. A collar touched the back of a neck as a head tilted slightly to one side. These movements were automatic, unconscious, the small adjustments that bodies make constantly in their effort to maintain comfort. During the minute, these movements seemed to happen more slowly, the fabric sliding across skin with a gentleness that was almost liquid. The textures of the cloth, the slight roughness of wool, the smoothness of linen, the soft weight of cotton, became more present, more noticeable, though no attention was being paid to them. The minute gave these small sensations more time, more space, allowing them to unfold with a kind of quiet completeness. The body continued its small movements, and the fabric continued its small responses, and together they created a soft symphony of texture and touch that filled the expanded space of the minute with gentle, restful presence. The enchantments that existed in the world continued their quiet work. These were not spells being actively cast, not magic that required concentration or effort. They were old enchantments, woven into the fabric of places and objects long ago, designed to perform simple tasks without attention or maintenance. A lamp that burned without consuming its oil. A door that closed itself gently after being opened. A warmth that spread through a room without the need for fire. These enchantments did not notice the minutes stretching. They simply continued their work, performing their small services with the same patient consistency they had always shown. The magic moved through them like blood through veins, invisible and constant, requiring no thought or direction. During the minute, the enchantment seemed to work just a fraction more smoothly, their effects becoming slightly more refined, as if the expanded time gave them more room to complete their tasks with greater precision. But this was so subtle it could not be measured or observed. The enchantments simply were, and they continued to be. And the minute held them in its gentle expansion. In distant rooms, clocks continued their counting. The mechanisms turned, the gears engaged, the pendulums swung with their steady back and forth motion. The hands moved around the faces, marking seconds and minutes and hours with mechanical precision. But during this particular minute, the movement of these hands seemed to soften. The ticking grew quieter, less insistent, as if the clocks themselves were exhaling, releasing some of the tension that came from their constant marking of time. The hands did not stop. They did not hesitate or jump or reverse. They simply moved more gently, their progression becoming less emphatic, more like a suggestion than a declaration. The minute stretched around these timepieces, giving them more space in which to complete their work, and the clocks responded by performing their counting with a kind of quiet grace. The time they marked was still time, still moving forward, but it was time that had been given more room to breathe, more space in which to exist. And when the minute passed, the clocks would return to their usual rhythm, unaware that anything had changed. Shadows lay across the floor and climbed the walls, their shapes determined by the position of the light and the objects that blocked it. The shadows were soft-edged and deep, filled with a darkness that was not threatening, but simply absent of light. During the minute, these shadows seemed to settle more deeply, to become more substantial, as if they were being given time to fully occupy the spaces they inhabited. The edges of the shadows did not sharpen or blur. They remained exactly as they had been, but the quality of the darkness within them seemed to deepen, to become more rich and more textured. The shadows were patient. They did not move or shift except when the light moved, and the light was not moving. They simply rested where they had been placed, dark pools and dark curtains that added depth and dimension to the room. The minute held these shadows, giving them more time to exist, more space in which to be what they were. And the shadows responded by becoming even more restful, even more a part of the larger stillness that filled the expanded time. The air in the room was still, unmoving, held in a state of gentle suspension. There was no breeze, no current, no flow from one place to another. The air simply existed, filling the space with its invisible presence, carrying within it the faint sense of dust and wood and the warmth from the lamp. During the minute, the stillness of the air seemed to deepen. It became more present, more noticeable, though still nothing was happening within it. The air was not thick or heavy. It remained light and breathable, but it had a quality of patience to it, a sense of being completely at rest. The minute stretched around this stillness, giving it more room, more time, and the air responded by becoming even more calm, even more settled. Breathing continued through this air, slow and rhythmic, and the air moved gently in response, flowing in and out of lungs with the same patient grace it had always shown. This stillness was not broken by this movement. The air simply accepted the breath, held it briefly, and then released it, returning to its state of quiet rest. Somewhere beyond the walls, the night continued its slow progression. The stars moved across the sky in their ancient patterns, their light traveling vast distances to reach the earth below. The moon, if it was visible, hung in its appointed place, its face turned toward the world, reflecting the light of the distant sun. The darkness of the night was soft and deep, filled with the accumulated shadows of all the spaces where light did not reach. During the minute, the night seemed to pause, not stopping, but simply resting in its own quiet existence. The stars continued their movement, but the movement was gentler, slower, as if they too were being held in the expanded time.
The darkness deepened without becoming oppressive, gaining a kind of textured richness that suggested depth and distance. The night did not notice this change. It simply continued to be night, holding the world in its soft embrace, offering its darkness as a medium for rest and restoration. The minute stretched through this darkness, filling it with more space, more time, and the night accepted this gift without question or awareness.
In the room, a book lay open on a table, its pages spread wide, the text visible in the soft light from the lamp. The words on the page did not change, did not rearrange themselves or fade. They simply remained where they had been printed, patient and still, waiting to be read or waiting to be ignored. During the minute, the page seemed to hold its position more completely, as if the paper itself had settled more deeply into its current state. The slight curl at the edges of the pages remained exactly as it had been, but somehow seemed more present, more defined. The book did not care about the minutes stretching. It simply existed, its pages held open by their own weight and the position in which they had been left. The minute gave this stillness more time, more space, and the book responded by being even more completely what it was, a collection of bound pages resting on a surface, holding words that would remain unread until someone chose to read them. The patience of the book was absolute, undemanding, and the minute honored this patience by giving it more room in which to continue. The weight of clothing pressed gently against bodies, the fabric resting on shoulders and backs and legs with a constant, barely noticed pressure. This weight was familiar, so ordinary that it was rarely felt consciously, but during the minute it became slightly more present. Not heavier, not more burdensome, simply more noticeable in a way that was soft and undemanding. The cloth held its position against skin, supported by the structure of the body beneath it, and the body accepted this weight without response or reaction. The minute stretched around this gentle pressure, giving it more time to exist, more space in which to be felt. The weight did not increase or decrease. It simply became more of what it already was, a quiet presence, a small constant that added to the overall sense of stillness and rest. The body beneath the clothing continued its slow work of breathing and being, and the clothing continued its quiet rest against the skin, and together they existed in the expanded time of the minute, held in a state of gentle, mutual acceptance. The dust that settled on surfaces throughout the room was invisible in the dim light, but it was there, a fine coating of particles that had drifted down through the air over days and weeks and months. The dust did not move during the minute. It simply rested where it had come to rest, on tabletops and shelves and the arms of chairs, waiting patiently to be disturbed by movement or wind or cleaning. During the minute, the dust seemed to settle even more completely, as if it were being given time to find its final position, to nestle into the tiny imperfections of the surfaces it covered. The minute held this stillness, giving the dust more time to be at rest, more space in which to exist undisturbed. The dust did not care about time or minutes. It simply was,
a collection of tiny particles that had nowhere to go and nothing to do except exist in the quiet spaces of the room. And the minute, in its gentle expansion, acknowledged this existence by giving it more time, more room, more of the soft stillness that allowed all things to simply be. Warmth spread through the room in a gentle, even distribution, radiating from the lamp and from the bodies that occupied the space. The warmth was not intense or demanding. It was simply present, a subtle increase in temperature that kept the air from being cold, that made the room a comfortable place to rest. During the minute, this warmth seemed to spread more thoroughly, to penetrate more deeply into the corners and the shadows, reaching places it had not quite reached before. The warmth did not increase in intensity. It simply had more time to move, more space in which to distribute itself, and it responded to this gift by becoming even more evenly spread, even more a part of the general atmosphere of the room. The minute held this warmth, giving it more time to complete its gentle work, and the warmth responded by creating an even deeper sense of comfort, an even more complete feeling of safety and rest. The bodies in the room accepted this warmth without thought, their skin registering the temperature without conscious awareness, and the warmth continued its quiet spreading, patient and unhurried. The silence in the room was not empty. It was filled with small sounds that were so quiet they were almost part of the silence itself. The soft ticking of a clock in another room, muted by distance and walls. The faint sound of breath moving in and out. The barely audible creak of wood settling into its position. These sounds existed within the silence without breaking it, small threads of noise that added texture to the larger quiet. During the minute, these sounds seemed to soften even further, to become more integrated into the silence, less distinct as individual noises and more a part of the general atmosphere. The silence deepened, becoming richer, more layered, and the small sounds within it seemed to merge with the quiet, becoming indistinguishable from the stillness they inhabited. The minute gave this silence more time, more space, and the silence responded by becoming even more complete, even more restful. The room was held in this deep quiet, wrapped in it like a soft blanket, and the silence asked nothing of the world except that it be allowed to continue. Consciousness existed in the room, though it was dim and unfocused, more a state of passive awareness than active thought. Minds were present, but they were not engaged in thinking or planning or worrying. They simply existed, floating in the gentle space between full wakefulness and sleep, held in a state of quiet rest that required nothing and expected nothing. During the minute, this state of consciousness seemed to deepen, to become even more diffuse and peaceful. Thoughts that might have drifted through the mind slowed and softened, becoming less distinct, less demanding of attention. The awareness that remained was gentle and accepting, noticing the warmth of the room, the softness of the light, the quiet sounds in the distance, but not focusing on any of them, not holding on to them or analyzing them.
The minute stretched around this consciousness, giving it more time to rest, more space in which to simply be, and the consciousness responded by becoming even more relaxed, even more at peace. The boundaries between the self and the room began to blur, and the sense of being a separate entity began to fade into the larger stillness.
The floor beneath supported everything with patient solidity. Chairs rested on it. Tables stood upon it. Bodies sat or lay against surfaces that were themselves supported by the floor. The floor did not shift or move or complain. It simply held, bearing the weight of everything above it with the same quiet strength it had always shown. During the minute, this support seemed to become more complete, more absolute, as if the floor were being given time to fully accept its role, to settle even more deeply into its work of holding. The wood or stone or whatever material composed the floor did not change. It simply became more of what it already was, a foundation, a base, a surface that could be trusted completely. The minute gave this support more time, more space, and the floor responded by being even more reliable, even more patient in its quiet work. The weight it held did not increase, but the holding became more refined, more complete, and the sense of being supported became more absolute, more restful. Beyond the windows, if there were windows, the world continued its existence. Trees stood in their places, their branches moving slightly in winds too gentle to be heard. Buildings rose from the ground, their walls and roofs creating the familiar shapes of human habitation. Streets stretched between these buildings, empty now in the deep quiet of the night. The world outside was at rest, not sleeping, but simply paused, held in the same gentle suspension that held the room and everything within it. During the minute, this outside world seemed to settle even more deeply into its stillness. The small movements of air and leaf and shadow continued, but they happened more slowly, more gently, as if they too were being held in the expanded time. The minute reached beyond the walls, spreading its gentle influence through the night, touching everything with the same soft expansion, the same patient stretching, and the world responded by becoming even more quiet, even more at rest, settling into the minute's embrace with complete acceptance and no awareness that anything unusual was occurring. The minute continued its slow unfolding. Time still passed, moments still accumulated, but they did so more gently, more spaciously, as if each moment had been given permission to take up more room, to exist more fully before yielding to the next. There was no sense of waiting in this. Nothing was being delayed or postponed. Everything that needed to happen was happening, but it was happening with a kind of relaxed grace, a lack of hurry that allowed each small event to complete itself fully before moving on. The breathing continued, the light continued to glow, the shadows continued to rest. The warmth continued to spread, the silence continued to deepen, and all of these continuations happened within the expanded space of the minute, held gently in time that had been stretched just enough to allow for a deeper rest, a more complete stillness. The minute did not announce this gift, it simply offered it, and the world accepted it without question, settling into the extra time as naturally as a body settles into a comfortable chair.
The enchantments woven into the fabric of the world continued their maintenance work, performing their small services with the same quiet consistency they had always shown. These magics were old and stable, requiring no intervention, no renewal, no conscious direction. They simply existed, woven into objects and places, performing their functions as naturally as water flows downhill or fire burns. During the minute, these enchantments seemed to work with even greater smoothness, their effects becoming slightly more refined, though the difference was so subtle it could not be observed or measured. The magic flowed through its appointed channels, sustaining the small conveniences and comforts it had been designed to provide, and the minute gave this flow more time, more space, allowing it to move with even greater ease. The enchantments did not notice this gift. They had no awareness to notice with. They simply continued their work, and the work was fractionally easier, fractionally more complete during the time when the minute held everything in its gentle expansion. The minute began to release its hold, though there was no moment when this release could be said to have started. It simply happened, as gradually and gently as the stretching had happened, a slow return to the ordinary flow of time that came without announcement or ceremony. The light in the room did not change, the shadows did not shift, the breathing did not alter its rhythm. Everything continued exactly as it had been continuing, but the space around each moment began to contract again, returning to its usual dimensions. The minute was passing, completing itself, yielding to the next minute that would follow it. The transition was so smooth, so gradual, that it could not be felt or observed. Time simply resumed its ordinary flow. The clocks returned to their usual ticking. The silence returned to its normal depth, and the world continued its patient existence without any awareness that something had been different, that for a brief span, a minute that had lasted longer than the others, everything had been held in a gentler, more spacious time. The minute passed completely, dissolving into the flow of time like salt dissolving in water, leaving no trace of its passage, no mark to show that it had been different from all the other minutes that had come before and all the other minutes that would come after. The room remained as it had been. The light still glowed with its soft warmth. The shadows still rested in their appointed places. The breathing still moved in and out with its slow, regular rhythm. The silence still filled the space with its deep, textured quiet. Nothing had changed, and yet something had been different. The minute had existed, had stretched itself gently through time, had offered its gift of expanded stillness to the world, and now it was gone, absorbed back into the formless flow of moments that made up the passage of time. The world did not notice its departure. The world simply continued, moving forward with the same patient inevitability it had always shown, carrying everything with it in its soft, invisible current. Time flowed on, unmarked and unmeasured except by the clocks that ticked in distant rooms, and the minute became nothing more than memory held nowhere. The night continued its slow progression toward dawn. though dawn was still far away, still hours distant in the soft darkness. The room remained at rest, held in its quiet stillness, the light continuing to glow, the shadows continuing to rest, the silence continuing to deepen. Time moved through this space with its ordinary rhythm, each minute following the last, each moment accumulating in the vast collection of all the moments that had ever been. The minute that had lasted longer than the rest was gone now, dispersed into the flow, indistinguishable from all the other minutes, except in the subtle way it had existed, the gentle way it had stretched itself through time. But this difference was not remembered, not marked, not noticed by anything or anyone. It simply had been, and now it was not. And the world continued its patient existence, moving forward through time that flowed as it had always flowed, carrying everything with it in its soft, inevitable current. The room rested, the night held, the silence remained, and time, in its formless way, continued its endless, unhurried passage through the dark.